This podcast is part of the Shareable Podcast Network. Learn more at shareable.fm. Welcome back to Shareable. Today, back on the show, I have Melanie Deziel. It is so awesome to have you back. I am really glad that we get the chance to chat about what's been going on in your life, what's been going on in my life, where it overlaps, all sorts of things, building on the conversation we had last time. I'm just super jazzed that you're back.
Yeah, super fun to connect. It's always good to catch up.
Yeah, so for those that don't remember you, you are a brand journalism storytelling specialist. You are the CEO, owner, founder, head honcho at StoryFuel, and you do really cool stuff. And you actually, I think, for those that haven't listened to the last episode, I got to go back and look at what the number was, but just search for Melanie Deziel on Shareable. And you did a really good job of kind of changing my mind in a lot of ways about kind of the sponsored content movement, like the whole, what are they called?
Like native ads.
Native advertising. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. So you really kind of opened my eyes to it and made me see it in a very different light. And I think it's partly because you have like a very strong, like ethical framework that I feel like underlies your work that may not be representative of everyone that's out there doing it, but you really kind of painted a nice picture of like what it could be in its most idealized fashion, I think. So I want to definitely talk more about that. But for those that did listen to the last episode, catch us up. Like what's been going on in your world? What's going on with you? What's new? What's different? Talk to us.
Yeah. So it's definitely, I'm trying to remember like exactly how much time has passed, but we've had a few major milestones, right?
It's been about a year-ish. It's been about a year-ish.
So definitely in the last year, I welcomed my first child, which was definitely a big, definitely. She came in August last year. So she's around 6 months old as we're recording this. She's wonderful. We are so happy, and so lucky to have a happy, healthy little one. But it definitely changes the way you operate a business as a solopreneur, as an entrepreneur. So, a lot of changes in that realm. And I also used my, I'm doing air quotes, downtime of maternity leave to finish writing my book that I've been also air quotes writing for a very long time. So that actually comes out Monday, comes out Monday. So those are probably the two biggest changes, biggest milestones in my life at this particular time. That's definitely top of mind for me.
That's really cool. I think one of the reasons I was so excited to jump on the phone with you or jump on this this episode was we have, I feel like very, very similar, but like kind of time displaced stories that are going on. So we're planning to welcome our first child May 1st, which is the day before my birthday. I'm hoping she shows up one day late because I hate my birthday and I would love to have her show up on my birthday so I can celebrate it once again. And, I have these ideas in my head that like at night when like I'm a night person, my wife is kind of a morning person. So I have these like ideas in my head that like I'll take the night shift and like I'll have baby in like one of those little slings and then I'll be writing my book or doing whatever my things are, like my night work, and she'll just be chilling, like sleeping on my chest or something. When I know that that's totally not going to happen at all. I have so many plans and I love talking trash to all of my friends that have kids because I know that everything's going to bite me in the ass and I'm totally wrong about everything. But I still like that I have this window to be like, oh, my kid's like going to eat and will never really cry and will sleep. And, when she does wake up, like she'll just, everything will go fine and according to plan because I know that it drives them nuts. Like I do this to my friend Marco and he just gets absolutely out of his mind for it. But so we have similar stories. I'm pretty excited about hearing how you've been managing this.
Yeah. And I think, to your credit, there are some babies and some points in time of that new parenthood journey that may be very much like that. I think what was such a giant eye-opener for me is having to just completely let go of expectations and schedule and timelines and just like it happens as it happens. That was probably the biggest adjustment for me because I am definitely a planner. I am very much that type A person who likes to know what's happening when, and I'm very serious about my calendar, and like you don't get that liberty. The baby is in charge of the calendar now, so that's definitely an adjustment. But you'll find those pockets of time. They just may not be when you expect.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm hoping that you're right about that. So your book is coming out Monday at time of this recording?
Yeah, so
that's
February
amazing.
24th.
February 24th, cool. So talk to me about that because I did not know that. So what's it about? Like, tell me about like what you're excited about with this because let's call this like a book launch then.
Exactly. Yeah. So the book is called The Content Fuel Framework: How to Generate Unlimited Story Ideas. And it's a book that I wrote for marketers and creators. And my goal was really, to try to, as best I could, pull out of my head the process that I use when I'm coming up with content ideas, because that was something I would hear from people, to use your kind of language, like that it was my superpower, right? That they couldn't understand, okay, how do you just look at our business and come up with 10, 20, 50 content ideas for it? How does that work? And I couldn't answer it. It was happening in my head, but I couldn't explain how. And so I mentioned, the air quotes writing. It took me a long time to kind of unpack the process that was happening inside my head and actually be able to explain it in any sort of understandable way. Once I figured out how to do that, it became very easy to actually put that down on paper and write the book. So, you know, my goal is that people who pick up this book are going to have sort of like a handbook to kind of sit down and come up with literally hundreds of content ideas that are unique, that are challenging them to tell stories in new ways and communicate with their audience in new ways, with relative ease, even if they don't consider themselves a creative or like a creative, a creator. That skill could be learned very easily.
That is amazing, because as we were, for the listeners, we were chatting a little bit before we jumped on and started recording. And the thing that I want to talk to you about, not even knowing that you were writing this book, is like, I literally wanted you to go through how you see things. The analogy that I've used with clients in the past is that it's sort of like I'm not a hunter, I'm not a gun guy or whatever, but from what I understand, if you're a hunter, you see things from a particular way, that like you can see when an animal is moving in a certain way, or maybe you even see the animal, and you have to be able to show someone how to see things in a particular way to be able to be good at that skill, right? And I feel like what I do in strategy and in some of the other areas of my life in sales and this and that, like I just see things that other people can't see. And I think that that's kind of what is underlying anybody that has a superpower, is that there's a thing that they can see, that they understand, that they have access to, a frequency, a vibration, whatever it is, that they get that other people don't get. And I believe that's a skill that you can learn. So when when we scheduled this, and I was like, okay, what are we going to talk about? I'm pretty excited for like the follow-up. And I was like, you know what? I just want to know how you do what you do. I want to figure out like, what's that thing that tickles the inside of your brain that makes you go, I see that thing. And how can then we see those same sorts of things? So if you don't mind, let's go through a little bit of that from the start. So I think kind of set the groundwork. When I talk with clients a lot of times, and I tell them to create content, and all content creators are going to say things along the lines of, tell great stories. Stories are a great way to package your information, number one. But number two, focus on value, right? Like deliver value, something that's important to your audience, so that it matters to them about consuming, right? Very generic advice across the board. So then the question becomes, well, how do we do that? And if you talk to like a Marcus Sheridan, a lot of that'll be like answering the questions that they have and things like that. You have a particular way of doing it where you come at it from a journalistic background. Talk to me about your process to the best of your ability. What's the starting point of how you think about things?
Yeah. So, what's interesting is that the book is really just purely about like the brainstorm process and how you can generate those ideas. It doesn't necessarily go into as much depth like what we really talked about last time, that whole journalistic perspective on sort of like ethical storytelling and making it credible and compelling. But when it comes to starting from scratch, like if you're trying to start from content and figure out what do I even tell stories about, never mind how effective your brainstorms are. I think that I turn to a lot of the similar frameworks that some of the others are using. So I always talk about, answering the questions that your audience has. One of the key challenges that we have when we're creating content is, as marketers, we care about everything that we want to say, and our audience very rarely aligns. What they care about is different than what we care about as marketers. I equate it to childlike gift giving, and that we're giving the gifts that we would want to receive and not necessarily the gifts that, our recipients, our audience actually want. And so creating content that's based heavily in your audience's questions, their actual real questions, whether you find that through, search engine optimization, looking at keywords and things like that, or talking to people on the front lines who are having face-to-face interactions with customers, then, you're going to make sure that they actually care about the outcomes because they've asked the question, you're answering it through content. So, Marcus is we're kindred spirits on that front of talking about the importance of answering audience questions. The other thing that I like to stress a lot too is the importance of reputable sources. And so I think one really easy way, again, like drawing on my background as a journalist, to beef up whatever piece of content you're creating is to really, really lean in. Who else can I talk to? Who is an expert on this topic? Whether they're inside the company or inside the organization or outside, who could I bring in? What are other perspectives I could bring in to kind of lend some credibility, back up things that I may be saying, find someone who can lend credibility to a hunch that I have. Just find other experts who can and add some diversity to the voice that you're bringing to your content.
Yeah, all good advice. What you when you were talking about like what we as marketers generally are interested in versus the customer, the thing that I like to tell clients all the time is like your biggest challenge is not that like you have to figure out what to do when you go viral. It's the chance is like 90% chance nobody cares at all about what you have to say. Like crickets
Yeah.
is more likely than applause. And if it's not crickets and it's not applause, it's probably somebody just crapping all over your hard work. So like to be able to even do that research and get to the point where you like put something out there and then you get crickets, it's like so difficult. There is some secret sauce around trying to get into the mind of that customer, and you kind of alluded to two things, which is like kind of one doing like that keyword research side of things
Yeah.
and looking that up, and the other is talking to people, which what a novel idea, right?
Right.
um
It sounds so obvious, but yeah, whatever form that takes for you. Like this could be if you have a brick and mortar, this is like talking to the people who are on the shop floor. Like they're the people who are interfacing with customers. They're getting questions. They're figuring out what people actually want. They understand the common objections, common myths, common misconceptions that you can tackle through your content. But you can also do like an old school focus group, like get a group of your consumers online or in person and just ask them questions, try to learn more about their lives, try to take them from this arbitrary persona, that's made up with a cartoon avatar and get to know them as real people.
what are your some of what are some of your like very in practice, we're going to do this, like I'm a business, you're working with me, you say, hey, do a focus group, because it can sound anything with content or with really anything in business where people will give advice, and then the inevitable next question, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses, is someone will say, well, how the hell do I do that? So like make it real
Yeah.
practical. How do you go about getting a focus group? Like, do you have to give people money? Do you have to give them free stuff? Do you have to give them lunch? Like, how would you go about working with a brick and mortar business, let's say, that wanted to hold a focus group? And what are some of the things you might tell them that they should focus on when talking to the customer?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple questions to ask if you're considering doing a focus group of any type, because there's like anything, there's sort of a spectrum of ways you can approach this. You can do it very, very simply and very informally. This could be coming up with a list of questions you want answers to, and providing them to, again, your associates, your representatives, whoever it is that's having FaceTime with customers, and just encouraging them to pepper those into conversation and keep track of the answers somewhere, right? So you could do it in a very informal way that doesn't require, a budget and free stuff and renting a venue, right? You don't have to get that serious if it's not within your means. You just want to come up with, again, that sort of list of questions. What are we trying to learn about them? What do we want to know? And then have a clear place for those answers to be tracked so that it's not just sort of, I guess, I heard, it sounded kind of like, but really tracking it somewhere. So you could do that at the most informal end of the spectrum. At the most formal end of the spectrum, yes, you can have an invite sent out just like you would tackle any other event. Get an invite of some kind sent out to a number of people, see who accepts, have them show up at a particular place for a particular, they know the purpose, right? They're saying, I'm going to be a part of a focus group. In those cases, because you're asking, time and sometimes travel of them, you do generally want to offer some sort of incentive, and that can vary based on what your business is. It might be, like you said, it might be free product. It could be a gift card. It could be, credit for services. It could be just that you're going to give them a nice free lunch, and you're going to have massages afterward. I don't know, whatever works for you, right? Just some incentive to make it worth their time to help you out. You may even find that there's a way to do something in the middle that's sort of digital. So maybe it's a quiz or a form, which you could do very simply with like Survey Monkey or Google Forms, totally for free, that you send out digitally, and you offer people some sort of digital incentive. Maybe it's a coupon code. It might be, an Amazon gift card is a really common giveaway that's sort of, all purpose for everyone. But so there's sort of different ways to approach it depending on how much time, effort, and other resources you want to put toward it. The idea is it shouldn't be overwhelming and intimidating to the point where it puts you out incredibly, or it's going to prevent you from doing other things important for your business. So find a level that's acceptable for you, that's going to work with your resources. And just remember that the real key is not what your prize is or how many people participate, but just you're really trying to get to know your customers better so that you can better serve them with the content you create.
Is there a level of like statistical significance that you kind of rely on? Because I can think of it like from the perspective of like, imagine you're a business and you feel like you know who your customers are. And then you have like 3 people come in and they complain about a certain something. And then you go ahead and make these broad sweeping changes and it offsets like the, other 97% of whatever of the customers that you have. I can imagine there's got to be a certain level at which you kind of put confidence in it or not. I think I'd assume you would agree that it's probably better to have something than nothing, right? Like getting any sort of feedback from your customers, like, well, that's a data point that I can play with. But
right.
As far as like making broad sweeping changes or adjusting your content strategy or really changing the focus of how you message yourself, I'd imagine there comes a point where there's kind of a tipping that you would suggest.
Yeah, so you're spot on. I'm not a statistician, so I'm not going to tell you that it's got to be this many standard deviations, right? Like we're not going to get that serious about it. Most of
and I wouldn't be able to check you on it anyway. I'd be, that sounds right. That's a bell curve, right?
Well, and most of us who are going to end up doing these things are similarly not coming from that kind of background. So what I would say is it's important to remember that the feedback you get from your customers is not a direct, it's a data point, like you said, right? So just because a customer walks in and says, I really want you to produce blah, 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 or I think you should make widget X, or I really wish that you offered this kind of service, doesn't mean that you need to immediately turn around and do it, right? That is one data point that you should look at in the broad scope of all the other data points that you get. And like anything else in your business or in your marketing, especially, you want to test things out. So, look to some of the common examples out there, Pat Flynn's Will It Fly? Like, look at ways to validate your marketplace, look at ways to test things out, to do a minimum viable product and see if there's interest. Don't have one focus group with 5 people and then completely change your brand, your product set, and the way you operate your business. It's not a smart move with any, major changes like that all at once.
Yeah, makes sense. So when you have that data then, kind of what do you do with that? So once you get a little bit of information back from a customer and let me actually say this differently. Now, what do you do? What should the business owner do thinking as you think? How do you go about taking that information and starting to see a story in that versus just seeing like a complaint or a suggestion or whatever? Like, how do you turn that into something that's compelling, that's interesting, that's worth clicking on and not just scrolling past?
Right. So the question that I would encourage you to ask when you're looking at the data points, some of it, like you said, some of it's going to be people shaking their fist at the clouds. Like some of it is just people complaining, and that really, you're not their therapist, you're not their partner in life to help solve all of their problems. But what the question I would ask with each piece of feedback or each data point that you see, especially if you're seeing it pop up many times or similar feedback popping up many times, is to ask, is there a way for me to address this issue through content? So that's the question. Is there a way to address this issue through content? So if, for example, you're seeing a common objection that comes up many times, well, I've never bought that because it's too expensive, or I don't think I can afford that, or just straight up, I can't afford that. And you are looking at that data saying, man, I know that's not true. I know that this is within their budget. It's, on par with other products that they say that they're buying. So the question you can ask is, okay, how can I address this issue through content? Sounds like I need to create some content that clarifies our price point. Sounds like I need to make our, product pages, the content on our product pages needs to be more clear about what this costs, because it seems that people think it's more expensive than it is. How can I be a part of a conversation on social media that indicates the level of investment that is or is not required for this particular product, right? So if you're asking yourself that question, how can I address this through content, or can I address this through content? It'll sort of lead you down the right kind of brainstorm to see, is there something I could make that would address this from a content perspective? And, one of the things I always suggest too is if there are other departments that are perhaps impacted by some of the feedback you get, definitely share that, right? You can't solve a product problem with content. You You can't solve a sales problem with content. You can solve some sales problems and some customer service problems, but there may genuinely be problems that arise in your focus group, things that come up in the data that you can share with other departments to execute on. So don't feel like you have to solve every single problem with the most genius blog post in the world. That's not going to stop, the pipes from clogging up in your product or something like that.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up too, because one of the things that I was immediately thinking as you were talking about this is that it can always sound when we say content like we're talking exclusively about marketing. And something I've tried to always dispel the myth with my clients has been, you can use content in your recruiting campaigns. You can use it as a method of like sales resources are content. Customer service, providing content that shows customers how to use a particular product or service, that's a content play. Yeah. So it's important to take it out of just being in the marketing realm and think, I like the way you phrase it, can content kind of solve this problem?
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you think about it that way, it does really encourage you to think outside the box too, because, so much of what we get stuck in when we're doing content, I feel, is like we fall into the same habits, right? Where it's like, okay, it's another blog post, or like, oh, it's Wednesday, time for a video, right? And you can kind of get stuck in this rut of creating the same kinds of things over and over again and lose track of really easy, novel ways to communicate with your audience. And you may be missing easy opportunities. So when you start with the problem, instead of, as we often do, starting with the format of the content, right? How do I make a blog post, or how do I make a video about this? It lets you really focus on the purpose of that content, because you're starting with the why and not the how.
Yeah, 100%. I'm 1,000%, 100 or 1,000, one of those in your camp on that. I think that, so you kind of alluded to the mindset of like, it's just so like it's Wednesday, it's just another blog post, or it's Monday. That kind of, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of those common mistakes, because what we're talking about is like, here's how to do it well and this and that. But I feel like a lot of that has to be really weighed against and contrasted against what the kind of common wisdom is that people do that tends not to work for them. So you're talking about finding relevancy by actually talking to your customers, which, I mean, mind blown, right? Like, it seems like so obvious, and yet so few companies do it. They just churn out unremarkable stuff, and then they wonder why nobody cares. Right. What are some of the other things that through the work that you're doing and the framework that you're developing are some of the kind of pitfalls that you're hoping people can avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some really common ones, and I'm not the only person, hoping to dispel some of these myths. But one of the major ones is people feel a pressure to be everywhere, and so they create mediocre content in a lot of places instead of really focusing in one place. And I'll just give you an example. We literally have a term for people who focus their efforts on YouTube, right? YouTubers. Right. And no one is criticizing the YouTubers, to the ends of the earth for saying, wow, they really have a horrible Instagram strategy, or like they're not doing enough blogging, right? Because where's their podcast? We understand that they have a niche, they have a real skill set, and they have one particular type of content that they're very skilled in creating. So you can be the same way with your brand, with your marketing. Obviously, there's a little bit more incentive for you as a business owner to try to have some presence in many places, but I don't think too many people expect, for most of us at the level of business that we're operating, if you're not, Coca-Cola or Ford, the expectation is not that you have fabulous, regular, high budget content on every platform that's ever existed every single day, right? So, that pressure to feel like if I can't be everywhere, then I might as well do nothing is sometimes paralyzing. So I would say it's better for you to focus somewhere and create something of quality consistently than to get caught up in this idea that, okay, in the next 2 days, I need to launch a YouTube series and an Instagram strategy, and I've got to do Facebook Lives every week, and kind of overburden yourself with this pressure to create amazing content everywhere all the time. Like, that is just not realistic for any of us. So that's a big one that I see a lot.
Yeah, and I don't want to like point fingers at anyone on this, but I feel a little bit like that's the Gary Vee effect to a certain extent, where like he's so prolific and all over the place, and his content is so high quality, but people forget he has an entire team that's helping him with that. But he's got a very strong, it's not his idea, but like the idea of content atomization, like taking one really solid piece of content, turning it into a bunch of little pieces and putting them everywhere is, I think, a really smart strategy. But I think to make that work, kind of to your point, you have to have a central home base of quality that everything else is atomized from. And I think that's where people get kind of lost in the sauce. They think I have to be everywhere. I have to put something everywhere. And they forget that like what matters most is to actually have something worthwhile saying in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're totally right. That the thing about Gary Vee too to remember is that like he started somewhere. Gary Vee, as he is now, is the present day evolution after years of A/B testing, years of hiring people, of honing his voice, of building his content cache. Right? When he started, it was Wine Library TV, and it was one topic in one format, produced consistently, and that's how he built his base, right? So you want to do the same thing. You can't launch tomorrow and have Gary Vee level proficiency that he creates with them. I don't even know, what is it, 50-person team he's got creating all of his content strategy now. You can't expect that of yourself. It's unrealistic. You'll always be disappointed. So start more realistically, figure out what's going to make sense for you. But this is tightly related to the other misconception that we see a lot, like the common pitfall, and that is lack of consistency. And I'm saying this with full knowledge that some of you would go look at some of my channels and see that I do not always practice this. But I'm going to pull that card and say, I have a 6-month-old, give me a break, right?
Do as I say, not as I do.
But consistency is really important. And so, I think a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to make one white paper a year. I'm going to launch our big quarterly, our big report, or a quarterly report 4 times a year, and then go silent in between. And like, imagine if your favorite TV show just randomly dropped an episode whenever they felt like it. Like, how could you possibly follow along, right? The whole magic of all these things that we fall in love with, whether it's a TV show or a series of movies, or a podcast, is that it comes out regularly. So you have a reason to keep coming back, right? You know when to expect it, you know what's coming, and you know when it's coming. So you need to kind of give that same cadence to your audience, right? Give them a reason to keep coming back, to subscribe, to engage, because they know that you're going to be there the next time they want some more cool content from you.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to say that I think that there's a second factor that's directly related to that, which is also consistency. So when you said consistency, you were talking about consistency and frequency and sort of like making sure that you show up on a regular basis, which I think comes to the consistency that I'm talking about, which is consistency of the message, consistency of the ideas, consistency of basically both of these are the audience is going to have certain expectations, and you want to make sure that you are meeting those expectations, whether that is when you show up or how you show up. There's got to be some sort of a way that you're being consistent with people, because otherwise you're creating and not that chaos can't work. I mean, I guess maybe if chaos is your consistency, that like it's always different, then that works. But I think otherwise, especially as like a brand, that's a tougher thing to pull off than saying like, here's who we are and here's what we're all about. Which actually leads me to kind of the point that I want to kind of double back on. We were talking a little bit earlier about, how brands create content and how companies create content. And, you specialize in this world of branded journalism, right? Which I think inherent in it talks about brand. How much do you work with the client on actually understanding? Because it must be really hard to do branded journalism if the brand doesn't know who the hell they are.
Yeah, so that's a really big question. I sometimes will get people who approach me saying like, can you help us figure out our brand?
Yeah.
And usually my reply is no, that's a little bit deeper work that needs to happen internal to the company. I can't tell you, as a content strategist, what your values are or what your company culture is like or what your vision for your company is, right? Like those things, the mission statement, the vision, all of that really needs to come from the higher ups. It needs to come from shared values, and it needs to come from someone probably closer to the inside of the company than me. Once you know who you are, I can help you share that through content, right? So I sometimes will play a role if there's an agency or an initiative internally to figure out that whole brand voice. I can play a role in seeing how does that come to life through content. So, it's often like a companion project. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I can't help you have a conversation with people if you don't even know who you are. That's going to be a major challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, how can you love somebody else if you don't love yourself? It's one of those same sorts of things, right? Where like you can't have a consistent message, you can't have cohesiveness through all of your different pieces of content or even just how you treat your employees and your customers if you don't first know who you are. So this is just a call to action. Everyone listen to the episodes I did with Gabor, with Lindsay, Pedersen, and with QXavier, all great brand episodes on Shareable. Also, if you don't know any of them, I should totally introduce you. They're all awesome. But yeah, so back to this idea of creating great, consistent branded content. So we started out with the idea that you can ask your customers what's going on with them. You can talk to them about it. I want to see if there's any other sort of starting points we may have overlooked. But from there, you then look for, can we use content to solve this particular problem? And then how do we implement it in a way that is consistent across all the different types of things we're doing? One, is there anything else we're missing on the kind of initial ideation side? I'm sure there's hundreds of things, but like what
so many things.
Yeah. But like, aside from like talking to your customers, what are some other just kind of quick tips for like how to start the process going?
So this may be a little further into the second process, like the second phase, I guess, but I think it's really important to know that it exists up front so that you don't become overwhelmed. So one of the things that often comes up when we see like similar types of questions in those focus groups or in your research when you're looking into customer questions and needs is this idea that there's sort of a categories or buckets of content, right? Where it's very similar content. And so my recommendation is always to see, I call them franchises, right? So things that show up a little bit differently in different places, but you always know you're going to get the same sort of thing. So coming up with content franchises not only helps you as a creator, as a strategist, know what to make when, but it helps your audience know what to expect. So an example of this might be like Mailbag Mondays, where you answer customer questions, that are sent into you via email or something on Mondays, or gluten-free Fridays, where you release, gluten-free recipes every Friday or something like that, right? So it doesn't have to have a catchy name that has, similar sounding words. And it doesn't even have to be public facing that you've named this franchise, right? They may just come to expect certain types of content from you. But it's helpful for you to know, okay, gluten-free Fridays, that means I need 52 gluten-free recipes to package for a whole year. Once I have those, I have a whole year's worth of my content for Friday, right? So by having those franchises, those recurring themes or buckets or categories, whatever's comfortable for you to call them, it really helps the whole process feel way less intimidating. And knowing that you're trying to create those buckets is sometimes a helpful way of looking at the feedback and all the questions that you find to say, well, what are similar ways we could group this stuff so that when it comes time to show up consistently and take all that data and turn it into content, sometimes putting it into those buckets and finding those franchises is an easy way to organize all that feedback.
Yeah, and that's actually a great tip, not just from like an ideation standpoint, but it's also actually really helpful when it comes to your SEO, because the way some of the most successful content websites are now built is around these idea of like content topic clusters, where you kind of have like let's say your content topic cluster would be recipes, and then from there you might have like gluten-free, vegetarian, carnivore, and keto, right, and Mediterranean, and then out of those you'll have like your different so it's like this hub and spoke model.
Yep.
And that works really nicely, because when I do a lot of my ideating with clients, I know that both you and I are both big fans of whiteboards, but like for me, I find mind mapping is one of the easiest ways for me to better kind of get the brainstorm flowing for myself and for the people I'm working with, because it allows you kind of let one idea naturally flow from one to the other, and you start to bucket them together. And even as you were talking about like your Mailbag Fridays, let's say, I was thinking like, okay, so you need 52 if you do it that way. But if once a quarter you did best of Mailbag Fridays, well, now you've got 48 that you need. And then like you could say like, you could then group those
best
48.
Of the month.
Yeah. And you could take those other 48 and bucket them by season. So now you've got spring, summer. And so all of that sort of stuff, it's like when you think about these ideas, start like go completely buck wild and then start trying to bucket them into these smaller categories and see what kind of patterns emerge.
The other thing closely related, and I know we're just sort of riffing here, but I think it's all good stuff, is the idea of batching your content. So for example, if you know that you have to have that many recipes or the mailbag thing, I think is a little more real-time responsive since it involves questions, but recipes or, tutorials or whatever other kind of content, you can create that in advance, or, theoretically, if you were going to release, a gluten-free, recipe every Friday, you may already have that in your archives, right? And it's just a matter of choosing and scheduling that content to happen in those ways. Maybe updating it a little bit. So by batching or creating a bunch of these things in one go and planning it all out, you're not going to feel that, oh my God, it's Thursday at 4 p.m. Tomorrow is gluten-free Friday recipe. I've got nothing. What are we going to make? How am I going to record it? And guess what? I have the flu this week. There's no way I'm touching food, right? So you can really help avoid a lot of the panic and overwhelm that can sometimes come when you're trying to create consistency by batching stuff in advance.
Yeah, I am a massive fan of batch processing things. I don't do it enough in my own work. But again, do as I say, not as I do. But I'm a huge fan of like sitting down and writing out 52 ideas. And you're like, if I schedule these every Friday for the entire year, I'm good for the year. It's like the satisfaction on the few occasions where I've actually been able to do something like that is like, oh, it's priceless. It's absolutely beautiful. So I'm a huge fan.
And sometimes it's overwhelming. You're right. When people are like, oh my God, 52 ideas. How am I going to come up with that? Where do I even start? How do I come up with, and I think you're right. It can feel very overwhelming, and having some sort of system. So, the mind mapping is a really good system if that works for you. Sometimes people will just try to create an exhaustive list and then revisit that list at separate times with a fresh eyes to see if they can add more to it. Or using a system like the Content Fuel framework in my book is another way to do it. It's just a matter of having a system, because I think, unfortunately, for a lot of us, we've been conditioned to believe that creativity is this totally mysterious thing that you're either like born with and you have this innate ability, or it's totally random and it's luck and it's, a stroke of genius that you have no control over. And it really takes the wind out of our sails. It takes the agency out of our creative work. And so having some sort of system, whatever works for you, having something to rely on makes it so much easier to batch all that content together and make sure you're going to be able to come up with what you need when you need it.
Yeah, it is such a misconception that like creativity is just like a lightning bolt. There's actually a really good TED talk on it where they talk about how creative ideas are often the product of getting a large number of people basically together and just letting ideas kind of overlap and crash into each other. He talks about like pubs in like the 1700s and stuff like that. And it was a really interesting TED talk. I am a huge process and framework person. Like, it's just, as somebody who naturally is ADD and all over the place, I use systems in every area of my life to essentially contain myself from just being like off in the clouds every day all over. I'm a huge fan of mind mapping, as you mentioned. There's one I just found out that I thought was really cool. And I think, to your point, like, find a system that works for you. I think people are often limited by the options that they know exist rather than all of the options that could exist if they just look out there. So as an example, I'm a like stick of dynamite type extrovert. So like if you put me in certain rooms, whether I want to or not, unless I really am like very self-aware at the moment, like I can absolutely run rampant over an entire room. So introverts in the room are like they need to go home and nap for the weekend after me. So my wife actually told me about this technique she just learned about. She just took a, was it Columbia or Cornell? It was a Cornell like e-course on like entrepreneurship. And I had never heard of this. Have you ever heard of brain writing?
No.
Oh my God. I think that's what it's called. I might be messing up that, but I think that's what it's called. It's essentially brainstorming, but that is introvert friendly. So here's how it works. Instead of, so like a normal brainstorm, I would be like, I have a bazillion ideas, and introverts are like, I need to think, I need to go home. So what you do is instead you give everyone a pad of Post-it notes, and then you ask a question. Everyone writes an idea, and then you take everybody's ideas and you put them up there, and then you read them all out, and then you say, okay, now I want you to go another level deeper and write more. So it gives essentially the extrovert the ability to just do what they do anyway, which is like, I have so many things to say, but in a quieter fashion, they can contribute, and it allows the introverts to have a way that works for them that's not having people like me make their heads explode.
Well, I love that. And you're right. There's so many people who have done such great research, in these courses. There's, you can find articles about it. You could find tutorials, games, kits. Like, there's so much out there, so many different options. So you can definitely find something that works for you, right? Maybe it's brain writing, maybe it's brainstorming, maybe it's having a Google Doc where everybody dumps their ideas, right? I mean, there's so many different ways you can approach this. But I think you're right. Having it doesn't really matter what the system is at the end of the day, as long as you have a system, because getting in a room together and going, okay, what are we doing is not a system, right?
Absolutely.
Like it's just not going to happen for you. And when content brainstorming is stressful, when you don't have a system, it becomes so much less likely that you're going to be consistent, that you're going to keep up with it, that you're going to, you're going to be much more likely to fall back on the bad habits that we talked about of like creating something that you saw someone else do already, or, creating undifferentiated content nobody wants, content that you think is super cool, but you haven't fully thought out whether it's relevant to your customers at all, content that's not tied into your overall business goals in any sort of way. And it was just super fun to make. So, having a system is just, I can't stress enough how whatever system you choose, just have one.
Yeah. What's your favorite part of this whole thing? Like not this interview, because obviously this is just awesome overall. But I mean, like working with clients, like what's the thing that you just, because so everything that we do as professionals, right? Like there's learned skills and there's natural skills. And there's like things that I'm sure that in this work that you do, you just kind of fell into, you just, from day one, you were like, oh, well, I can do this really well. Like I'm comfortable with this, whatever. And then there's the things you probably had to like work on as aspects of working with clients. Maybe it was like dealing with difficult clients and like being able to keep your cool. That's something I dealt with. But like there's all these like different things that we have to work on. We do well and what we don't. You are so interested and passionate about these stories that you get to help brands tell and helping them figure it out. I'm curious, like what's the part that like you come home and you were like, I had a great day. Like what's the thing that you're talking about when you're talking about that?
So the thing for me, and like this drives so much of what I do, is I do truly love storytelling. I love finding ideas. I love telling stories. Like that's what lights me up. But the only thing that I like even more than that is watching other people fall in love with it. Like that transformation for me, having a room full of skeptical engineers or like sales guys or something, like come into a room and be like, oh my God, a storytelling workshop. And then at the end have one of them be like, man, I've got so many ideas. I can't wait to work with our blog team. Like that moment for me, when people have a shift and they see themselves as storytellers and they're psyched about it, like that's the moment that I absolutely love. And that's what's been really cool for me for the book. So I mean, it's not out yet, but we've had some early readers, and what was really fun for me is the people in the launch team being like, oh my goodness, this is not my job title at all, this is not my space, but I can't wait to go to work tomorrow and share my ideas with our editor, with our blog team, with our marketing team. Like when I feel like when I watch, it's like, they say like an angel gets its wings. It's like watching a storyteller get their wings. Like that's the moment for me, because I hear that triumphant noise and I'm like, yes, we've got another one. Like we've got a believer.
I love it. I dig so much of the same stuff. Like the moment where you get somebody enrolled in an idea that they were initially resistant to, that's the most rewarding one. But when you get that impact, when you feel like the work that you did landed, like you're not doing it all for nothing, because there's so many of those losses, especially as a solopreneur. You have those serious letdowns where like you put your heart and soul in a thing and like somebody just didn't get it, and then you have those ones where like they're just so involved in it. And your story really resonates with me, like about the engineers. I was working with a company that does. They work in finance. So like they're not naturally storyteller, excitable, but I brought them in a room, and what I did was Copyblogger has this segment called Magnetic Headlines. And it's like a whole guide to writing great headlines. And I was like, I want to try out like an idea, because I wanted to involve my client in building the content strategy. I just didn't want to come back with like a bunch of research and ideas and talk to people and like, here's your topics, right? So I wanted to get them involved. So I talked to them, and we got kind of like our buckets together. And then I handed them the Magnetic Headlines guide, and it was all of it was like 38 different headline formulas. And I was like, here are our topics. Go. Give me, like, use the headline formula. Give me some headlines of things. And there are these like lawyers and finance people in the room just jazzed to come up with like, like the sort of headline that you would see if Cosmopolitan was a financial magazine.
Yeah.
But they were so jazzed. And it was one of the more rewarding experiences when I had my agency, was that time that I got these people all really super jazzed about coming up with headlines. That would be like me getting really jazzed about a spreadsheet. Like, oh yeah, the numbers line up.
You know what it is? And I think like part of the magic of it is that in some cases, we're changing a fundamental belief that someone has about themselves, right? Like
Yeah.
like it's a limiting belief. Like I'll share openly. I didn't do well in math when I was in school, right? I was always drawn more to literature and English and writing. Like those are, you look at my SAT scores, it's a very sharp slant, like,
Yeah.
two very different categories for me, right? And so I had this belief, for a long time that like I'm not good at math, right? And in my adult life, I was able to find tools and help to kind of help me get past that. It's still not my superpower, but I no longer will characterize myself that way. And for so many people, I'm not a creative. I'm not, clever. I can't write witty headlines. Like they think it's a reflection of themselves that they've not been taught how to use that muscle, right? And so to have someone come into that room thinking like, this is useless, this is not for me, I can't benefit from this because I'm not X, right? To have them walk out of that room feeling like, wow, I'm clever, I can write punny headlines, or like I'm funny, I'm quick-witted. Like those changes, like sometimes it feels so much bigger because it's not just like a new job function that they can do, but a shift in the way they think about themselves and their capabilities. And that to me is magical.
I completely agree with you. It's like so heartwarming when you see someone believe that they're capable of more than what they thought they were. And it's actually the whole reason that I started the Superhero Institute, is that for me, like one of my greatest joys in life is seeing someone like get something, like whatever it is. Like I don't even care what it is, but typically it's something where like they understand a new thing, and I know that they're going to go and take that and do better in some aspect of their life because they now have this new superpower that they've learned. Like that to me, like nothing jazzes me up more than seeing somebody feel empowered. So I am 100% with you, and that kind of impact is massive.
Well, and it's interesting for me. I wonder if you feel the same thing. Is that it's a shift for you as a business owner or educator or thought leader? As the person delivering this, right? It's a definite change because I spent a good amount of the early part of my entrepreneurial career really focused on tactics. And so you still get that, but you get it in tiny bits. It's like
Yeah.
I showed someone a new tool, or they're going to go try that thing. But all of it is short lived, right? Like trying a tool is useful for the 5 minutes a week that they need to do that very minute task. And you might save them a few minutes, but it's not transformative. And so I think when you make a shift in your work where you go from teaching people how to do things to teaching people how to think differently, you even feel it as the person sharing that message. You feel your impact magnify,
Yeah, of course. And that is exactly it, because and this is back to what we talked about at the very beginning about the hunter, right? And being able to see things. If you can change the way that people perceive the world around them, you can change everything about their world. And I know it's like grandiose for like, we're talking about content strategy here, but like, I really do believe it though. And even within content strategy, if you can change the way that somebody sees what their responsibility is as a creator to their audience, you can absolutely change the entire outcome of how their content is received, which can in turn change the revenue that they generate, which in turn changes how they can give back or where they take the next phase of their career or whatever. So I 100% believe in that.
Well, and it's interesting, you mentioned brand journalism. It's actually not a phrase that I use often anymore. And I think part of that, obviously the perception of journalists has changed in our current cultural and political environment. So that's one thing worth noting. But I think it really, for me, it was more of a mindset and not a it wasn't a list of tactics, right? So I'm not trying to teach brands to like actually be journalists, or I don't want them to identify as journalists. They are not journalists, right? But I want them to think of that mindset. I want them to think a little bit differently. So to me, the goal is not necessarily that every piece of brand content we create rises to the level of journalism, but that in tiny ways, as we're interviewing a source, right, and saying, how can I bring a reputable source in here, that there's just a little bit of journalistic like sprinkles put on top of our recipe, right? That's the idea, is just to shift the thinking a little bit. So it doesn't have to be a complete transformation, but that where I started, is trying to say, how could we sprinkle a little bit of journalistic thinking, a little bit of that approach into it? And I think this new approach, talking about how you generate ideas, how you can activate your creativity through structure, is a little bit of a bigger ask for people.
Yeah, it's. I think the whole journalism, I feel like you and I could have like a whole long conversation on journalism, because so I just had a 2-hour conversation with a friend of mine about journalism versus news. Sort of like there's another topic, history versus the past. Like two similar related things, but very different. Like to me, I see journalism as basically a set of standards. It's a way of doing a thing, a way of telling stories, a way of looking into things that has a certain structure. And so like the news is a different thing. That is basically the
product
spun output of journalism, right? So we could have a very long conversation on that. But I don't want to get into that. We'll do that another time. Maybe we'll do that offline. I don't know. But I want to talk about impact, because I think a natural progression of us talking about the impact of our work, I want to talk about the impact of your work, which is in perusing your website, I see that there's a lot there about what you want your work to mean in terms of how you give back and the sort of things that you're involved in. So just to kind of set the ground for anybody listening, talk to me a little bit about like what your commitment is as far as giving back. What are some of the causes that are important to you and why? And I just want to riff from there a little bit, because I'm a big fan of if we're going to save what capitalism has to offer, I think we have to start being more conscious about things. We have to start giving back. We have to start, and not for the sake of PR, but for like, because it actually freaking matters to us. So I see that come through on your site. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, one of the things that was really important for me is remembering what's important to me. And I know that was a little bit of word salad there, but, but what I mean is that like, it's very easy when you're an entrepreneur and you are focused on business and bottom line and making money all the time to kind of lose sight of why you got into this in the first place. And so for me, trying to find even small ways to make sure my values are lived out in the business that I create, it is really important to me. And so I do that in a couple different ways. And, I don't know exactly which parts of the site you were looking at, but, I'm very environmentally conscious. I'm not perfect by any stretch. I don't claim to be zero waste or like, carbon neutral. That's not feasible for me at my current state, but I'm doing the best with what I can. So, we try really hard in our home to be minimal about the things that we have here. We're, crazy about recycling. And so I try as much as I can, especially when I'm traveling and going to conferences, which is, not the most environmentally friendly industry to be in, to find little ways to do that. So I always have in my bag, I have a reusable straw. I have a reusable spork that I use, whenever I'm doing takeout or something. I have a, reusable coffee mug that I try my best to remember. It doesn't always fit in my carry-on and my personal item, which is a challenge. So looking for new recommendations there. I do little ways that you can just try to make sure, we do all digital invoicing and we try to minimize the amount of paperwork and printing that we do as a company, just to, tiny things we can do to be more environmentally conscious. And we also every quarter purchase a carbon offset. So we basically invest in, it's a small amount, but invest in projects that, support the environment in a way that offsets the carbon emissions of any planes, trains, and automobiles that we would have used over the course of that quarter. So just looking for ways, the environment is obviously, we get one Earth. And so, I want to make sure that I'm not leaving it worse off than I found it to the best of my abilities. And so those are some of the little things that I do to try to make sure that I'm at least being conscious of that in my day-to-day life.
I think that's really awesome that you do that. And what I got from the page on your website and from that explanation is that it comes from I hate to use the word authentic because that word just feels loaded to me these days. But like, I feel like you're doing it for the reason that it's important to you and you would do it no matter what. And that it's like, it's not about the money. And there's like this whole world of like woke brands these days that are like doing the things because they want to be perceived in a certain way. And I feel like even by the way you tell the fact that you're doing those things, it's not to be like a look at me. It's like this is what's important to me if you want to know about it. So I was
surprised you even found that page because it's not in the navigation bar. Like it's hidden away for when people ask, do we have any causes? Are we aligned with anything? It's like, okay, it's here. I can give it to you, but it's not like, it's not on our about page. We're not like proudly proclaiming it. It's really just to be able to answer that question that the audience has. I mean, there's a couple other small things that we do. Education is very important to me. So I am a first generation college student and I was very blessed to receive a number of different scholarships and other forms of support that helped me get through school. So I make it a point to speak whenever I can to college courses and to college students. if I can help them in their journey, if they're considering coming into content strategy, and I often do that at no or at a reduced fee. So just to hold the horses of anybody who's going to send me 50 emails requesting that I speak to your class, I do have limits. So because I have to, support my family as well, I make sure I try to do it at least once a quarter. So I may need to book it out several semesters in advance, but I try my best to make myself available for college students so I can, do my part in supporting that. I also run a mastermind. So I run the Brand Storyteller Mastermind, and I always have one seat in that. That is, I call it a scholarship, so a creator scholarship. And the idea would be it's someone who's in a position where they would really benefit from being a part of the group, but they're maybe not in a position to get themselves into the group. And so it might be, in the past we've had it someone who works at a nonprofit, where there's, benefit to them being a part of it. A student, perhaps, if they just can't afford to be a part of it, but they're making a career transition. We've had people who are recently laid off who are in need of a career transition. So just trying to find a way to see how can I make this accessible to people who are, in a position to really benefit from learning,
Yeah, I love it. Well, just cards on the table. I am fully planning to steal some of those ideas because I believe that. So like I have a mastermind that I'm beginning for the Superhero Institute, and I love the idea of the scholarship. So I'm probably going to take that idea, just so you know. I'm telling everyone right here on the air.
Please do. I wish more people would.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea.
The one thing that I always, that is important is I make sure that nobody in the group knows who got it. It's not, because it's not performative, right? Yep. We're not doing it to feel good, to say, look, I allowed this person into this sphere, right? No, this person deserves to be part of this sphere, and they deserve to feel like they are part of this sphere. So we're not going to, sort of other them in this way of like labeling them. That's not the goal at all. So, making sure that person feels just as much a part of the group as anyone else.
Yeah, I love it. I also, I know that you're doing some work with a women's organization. I really align with that because for me, homelessness is like the thing that breaks my heart more than anything else in the entire world. So while I don't have it all up and running yet, because I literally just started my business like January 1st, basically, like officially, but I do plan to get something going where like a portion of funds or something that we do goes to benefit that. So that's another thing that I saw that and I was like, that's really, really cool that you're doing that.
Yeah. So this particular issue, I think no secret, I am a woman and I'm a woman in the industry. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And now I'm a mom. And so I'm a mom of a daughter, even more so. And so I am very, very aware of issues that face women more than men, of challenges that women may encounter that are not always, we're not always aware of. And so this is a particular issue close to my heart. One of the things that I learned a few years ago that really struck me is that women who are homeless or underprivileged or, otherwise going through tough times, that securing menstrual products is one of the major challenges, right? These are very expensive and yet very necessary. We don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And so, it was one of those things that had never occurred to me. I've been blessed never to be in that position. But once I learned about it, I couldn't ignore it, that this is a very easy way for me to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And a few years ago, I was actually at a conference. I was the professional, I forget the name of it, but it was for meeting planners, right? It was PCMA is the group. And they had actually a session at the conference where they were assembling what they called period kits. So you could volunteer if you had downtime in your agenda to go over and put products into a bag and staple it up. And those would be donated to a local, people in need, essentially, at different shelters and organizations. And so it occurred to me that that's something that was very, very easy to do, right? This is like, when we think about the things we spend money on and how that money could be repurposed for something that has a much bigger impact on someone's life. It was a personal project I took on to sort of repeat that at home. So I actually wrote a Medium post about this. I can give the link in case people care. But I found out from Amazon, I did some very strategic shopping, and we were able to make a couple hundred kits that, the little paper bag contained everything a woman would need for one monthly cycle. And we were able to donate, a couple hundred of those to our local shelter. And it was incredibly easy to do. Like, it cost under $200. It's so easy to make such a massive impact, and so that's something we try to do, whenever we can. I'm hoping we can do more. And I think we were being candid earlier talking about, I'm building my business back, having just come back from maternity leave. And so the ways in which we can give back are probably a little more limited, the first half of this year until we get things back up and running. But, we're always looking for ways we can do that and keep living those values.
Awesome. Well, I super support it. I think it's really cool that you're doing it. I want to, the last topic I want to talk about with you today, and this has been just as enjoyable as the first conversation. So if you want to come back and when you write your second or third book, you definitely have a follow-up book in you about brand journalism that goes the next level deeper about, the journalism side of things. But I want to talk to you a little bit about this, maternity leave and coming back. I mean, I think on the one hand, you have a unique perspective as an entrepreneur that took maternity leave. That is a whole different thing than somebody who works for a company that takes maternity leave, often which they don't get any. So like there's this whole thing. So you stepped away from your business, which is such a tough decision to do at any point for an entrepreneur. Sometimes even weekends are tough to take off. And you stepped away to take maternity leave. One, want to talk about that, and two, I want to talk you to kind of just talk a little bit about what your experience is, really just what your experience has been like from throughout this whole process of being able to maintain and keep a business and also have a child.
Yeah. So I will preface this by saying that no one should take, we talked about take this as a data point and not a directive.
Yeah.
Worked for me and my family, and what we did, whether it worked or not is not necessarily what's right for you. I recognize that I'm very blessed to live in the part of the country where I do. I'm in New York, so there are a lot of opportunities that are local for me and easier for me to engage with than someone who may be some other place, right? So when I say I took maternity leave, what I mean is I was not going to the office every day for the months leading up to when my daughter was born and the few months after. So just for some clarity here, she was born at the end of August. I did not speak in July, August, September, or October, right? So the very first few gigs that I did, October, November, December, were all local, and there were only 3 of them. So it was very, very like I'm going into New York City on a train and coming home just a few hours later. So it allowed me to really take a slow test and adapt approach back into business. I didn't start going back to the office. Currently, I go to the office five days a week. I have a co-working space that I use since my office is now a nursery. Until midway through January, I started going back to work. So that was a pretty long break of not operating at maximum capacity. And even now, I wouldn't say I'm operating at maximum capacity. I'm working my way back up, right? That was scary. And I will be honest in saying that it was more difficult than I probably anticipated or could have guessed. As you were saying, right? You don't have no idea what parenthood is like until you're in it. You have all these plans and you imagine, but you don't really know until you're there. For anyone who's in that same situation, the one thing I would really strongly recommend is having a firm end date or a firm transition point by which you are ending your maternity leave frame of mind and going back into work mode. Because I didn't have a date. I didn't have a hard and fast, like, as of January 7th, I'm back in the office 5 days a week. And that made the transition a little bit harder because I sort of had to wait until I was overwhelmed, or wait until I was behind, or wait until I missed it to really have the impetus to make the change, right? So even though you aren't limited by a day job that says you get exactly 12 weeks, no more, no less, you should set a deadline for yourself so that you can know to make the appropriate preparations, whether that's childcare or some other situation to make that change happen. I think when you create your own schedule, it's really easy to forget that you need to give yourself a back to work date. And that makes it harder. So that was definitely a lesson learned. What else have I learned? I mean, I think one of the things that was also challenging for me is I wasn't seeing a lot of people like me doing what I was doing. And that obviously comes from a privileged place of being, a middle-class white person, and that there's definitely more diversity or more representation for me than others who may be in a different situation. But by what I mean by that is I wasn't seeing, keynote speakers performing at the types of events or at the level that I'm performing who had young children. There's not many of us, right? There are a few. And since I've had a baby and been vocal about not knowing any others, we've found ourselves through introductions, right? Found one another. But that was really challenging for me when I remember being pregnant and thinking, if I can't see people who are doing it, is it because it's not possible, right? Like if I don't see speakers, moms who have a 3 or 4 month old at home who are on stage at a conference, is it because you can't do it? Am I putting myself on permanent maternity leave without realizing it, right? So that was definitely stressful and challenging for me, is wondering, like, is this even possible? Is the reason I can't find an example of this because it can't be done? I think it can be done. I think I'm still figuring it out, right? I'm only 6 months in, but we're finding systems and means of making it work that so far are working, and we'll continue to A/B test and iterate and see where we end up,
Well, I think it's great that you're sharing it and you're sharing it openly, because I think you kind of really nicely tied up what the case is for diversity, inclusion, and representation, which is that if you don't see it, you don't necessarily know that it can exist. And the experience that you had of not necessarily seeing people who are pregnant in your position doing your sort of thing, if they're not there, the thought could be, well, maybe it's just not a possibility. So I think it's a really nice way of kind of illustrating the point. Is there anything that you would do differently than you did? I mean, aside from setting the end date, like specifically as being an entrepreneur, owner of your business, pregnant, baby, maternity leave, the whole thing, you're playing it by ear, right? Like I'm about to be dropped in that deep end of the pool and try and figure all this stuff out too. Like, will I be able to still do work? So like what sort of things, if you looked back on it, if you decided to have a second child, or if you could just go back and talk to yourself for the first child, like what's the thing you'd be like, Melanie, don't forget X?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the piece of advice I gave about, like, you make your own schedule. So give yourself a date. You're going to start making some changes and getting back into your old routine, or whatever your new routine looks like. Right. So give yourself that date. I think that would have made a world of difference for me. The other thing that, and this is a little more vague, so hopefully people can interpret this in whatever way is helpful for them. I think that I could have advocated for myself a little bit better professionally, and maybe not counted myself out of so many opportunities. I think obviously as a new parent, and particularly when you're expecting, you never really know what kind of energy levels you'll have or how physically well you'll be feeling. But I think I put myself maybe on the sidelines in certain situations, or, turned down certain opportunities that in retrospect, I probably didn't have to do that, or I didn't have to do it as soon as I did. And obviously you live and you learn. And so next time around, I'm, assuming everything goes equally as well, I'll have a better understanding of what those limits are. But yeah, I mean, I think there hit a point in my business where I stopped booking gigs, for example, in June or July, because I thought, well, I don't know how I'll be feeling, so I guess I just won't do anything. And I think that, there's other ways to account for that than just counting yourself out, sort of taking yourself out of the equation. So yeah, I mean, again, that's kind of vague advice, but whatever that means for you in your life, sort of don't count yourself out too soon, because I think while a lot of your listeners may not be going through having a young baby soon, or going through pregnancy, you're probably going to have other interruptions in your business, whether it's like, caring for an ailing parent, or, you have to move. And so that requires you to take some time off, or, maybe you have some sort of other health issue that requires you to sort of take a step back. Hopefully there's something you can take from that, as, not to let yourself make a turn without any plan to get back on track. So having that sort of end date by when you want to at least reevaluate your situation. And also just don't count yourself out too soon. Don't assume that it's all dead and over just because you've had to make a temporary adjustment.
Well, shit, I think that's good life advice. Don't count yourself out. You might be stronger than you think you are.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute blast talking to you. Before I let you go, a couple things. One, I know that your book isn't out yet, but you're probably starting your book tour and going out there and letting people know about it. So given that I didn't know that you were writing the book and launching it, but it perfectly dovetailed into what I wanted to talk about anyway, if there's anything that I didn't ask you about, by being completely unprepared that you have a book, is there anything that you'd like to tell people about the book, why they should buy it, what's in it, what they'll get out of it, or anything that you wish that I asked you that you just want to take a second and talk about? That would be kind of point one. And then point two is just letting people know where they can go and learn more about you, connect with you online, hire you, see you speak, whatever.
Sure. Yeah. So to your first point about the book, I mean, we had a really good conversation about it. The one thing I want to stress is that this book is useful for you no matter what kind of content you create and no matter what kind of business or entity you are, right? So this is not only a book for people who are formally marketers in their day jobs. This can be used if you're an influencer, if you're an author, if you're a thought leader, if you're a blogger, a YouTuber, if you're a local business. Like, if you create content of any type, email, print, video, whatever, to communicate with your audience, you will get something from this system and you will learn something that allows you to be a more prolific storyteller, a more prolific creator, and more efficiently communicate with your audience. So don't feel like it's not for you, right? It's really for anyone who communicates with an audience. To your second point about where you can find out more, if you want to grab a copy of the book, it is available for pre-order, but by the time this comes out, you can just go ahead and get it on Amazon. I created a short link for you, so iwantmelaniesbook.com will take you right over to Amazon. You can go ahead and get yourself a copy there. And you can learn more about us and all that we do at StoryFuel at storyfuel.co. So that's storyfuel.co, and that's where you can learn more about the book. You can learn more about our the Brand Storyteller Mastermind, about our coaching opportunities, about consulting, speaking. All of it is there on the website. And if you ever, go looking for me, I am Melanie Deziel, Deziel, pretty much anywhere you find people. So you'll find me there.
Cool. And if you want to know about her efforts to give back, go where I went, which was down in the footer. Well, it's been a blast having you on the show. Again, hope to do many, many more of these. Good luck with everything that you're working on. It's great to see you back in action. Congrats on the baby, since I haven't spoken to you since then. And keep fighting the good fight. And thanks for putting yourself out there so that others can see that it can be done. It's really, really cool of you.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me share my story.
Yeah, of course. This episode was awesome. I think it was shareable.